So just to have a chance to slow down and fellowship with men and do that in a setting where the Holy Spirit is present, it's incredible. And you can't even describe it. And you leave and people are like, what was it like? And you're like, and it was awesome. Well, what do you mean? It was awesome. Like, you got to go. You had to experience it. It's like.
Hey, welcome to the Man Up Podcast. I'm your host today, Terry Gwaltney, and I've got my good friend, Mr. Matt Haney, with us today. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thanks, Terry. Glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
I've been looking forward to this. So, I know you really well, but I really want the audience to kind of get to know you a little bit better today. I know you did a video for us at Man Up last year that was pretty impactful. I know your journey is maybe not so unique with some of the people maybe that are listening to the audience, but I think it's filled with hope, and that's the cool part. It's sometimes I think it's hard to, when you're making history, it's very hard to realize what's happening. It's just like the old saying, hindsight's 20/20. And so now that you have some of that, maybe you can give some hope with your story to some people maybe that are still living some of that. So why don't you share just a little bit of your journey and kind of how you got started, what field you were in. You're obviously in a totally different field now, and we'll just take it from there and run with it.
Yeah, so I would like to think some people get hope, but at least they're going to find out what not to do. So
we can learn from everybody.
Right. So my path here was a little weird. It always illustrates how God just puts you right where you're supposed to be, and we can be really hard-headed and fight that. So, without the whole 40-minute story is, I was a pretty good kid in high school. We ran race cars, middle-class family, had a good life. Really nothing I can really look back and say, well, that was terrible. And so I graduated high school, had my first company, which I'd actually just started out because I wanted to race, and that was going to be expensive. So my dad was like, hey, here's a lawnmower, and here's 5 yards, and you're going to help me pay for this. So, and I just kind of took that blindly and ignorantly and ran with it. And by the time I graduated high school, I really had my first career because I was making enough in high school that it was a legitimate income. So graduated high school, bought a house, bought 11 acres. Grew my business a little bit, but where race cars had kept me busy on Friday and Saturday nights and during the week in high school, I was the youngest guy probably in my town to have his own house, and so it became a pretty cool place to be for a while, and that set me down a pretty rough road, and started experimenting with drugs and obviously alcohol and in the 80s and 90s, there was a commercial that said, nobody says they want to be a crackhead when I grow up. Well, nobody says they want to be a meth head when they grow up either. But I achieved that, and through that, I ended up losing my company. I had to sell my house and all that. I did get out of that with the skin of my teeth. So financially, I wouldn't say I came out of it okay, but I broke even. So that was a blessing. So I decided, hey, you know what? I'm gonna go back to college. So I did for a while. I actually made it to my junior year in the University of Kentucky engineering program, but the drugs and alcohol never quit through that. So, I was able to be a functioning addict, so to speak. And my statics professor walked in one day, and I hadn't been there in several weeks. And he walked in, he looked at me, he said, "You've got to be kidding me." And I sat there and I looked at him, and I said, "You know what, Dr. Benson, I'm not." And I closed my book and I walked out. And he was right. He was right. I was holding other people back in the class. He was absolutely right. So I never went back to college. I did later on, but I just left college. And really pretty much for the most part, I had odd jobs here and there, but selling drugs was my job. That's what I did. That's just what I did. And so I did that for until I was probably, I was 26 when I got busted, and went into an in-house long-term rehab program. There's a whole story that goes along with that, which is kind of crazy. I had to meet with the overseer, a very interesting guy, and a guy very in tune with God in a way that I couldn't even understand at that time. And so when I first met him, he actually came to me at my grandmother's. I was building a deck for her, and he said, Matt Haney, he said, you don't know how many times I've heard that name in prayer. What? What are you talking about? You know, I didn't get that, but he knew me somehow. Now my father had used some connections he had to get to this gentleman, but before my dad ever got there, somehow this gentleman knew exactly who I was. Really weird. So anyway, there were no beds available at the rehab, but he got me in there. My alternative was going to trial and facing 20 years in a state penitentiary. I'll give you 6 months for 20 years, 8 days a week, you know. So that's what I did, and I ended up there about 8 months and got out. I was a felon at that point, so wasn't a lot of career options. So I went to work in a factory. It was a fiberglass plant. My first day there, I looked around and said, well, this job is terrible. So I've got it paid good, had good benefits, and for a felon, it's about all you could hope for, aside hitting the river at the time. So I said, well, I took a page out of my dad's book and I learned everything I could about the factory, and I moved up. So I ended up basically a foreman. Through that, Jared, while all that's going on, ironically, and this is going to sound weird to some people, and I'll bring it back around, my dad started building moonshine stills. So there's a whole nother story that goes with that, how he got there. But we don't have time for that. We'll just stick with he started building moonshine stills.
Legally
Building moonshine stills. And the laws are written just enough where you can get an ethanol permit to make ethanol fuel, which means he could legally test his stills. And through a very interesting story, he ended up with quite the business at the time. And he ended up leaving a 32-year career at a factory to do this business. Well, I broke my arm and I couldn't work. And he's like, don't worry, I just bought a house. I mean, my life had really gotten going. To the point where the prosecuting attorney that had prosecuted me 2 years in called me, and he said, Matt, how you doing? I said, well, I'm doing good, Mike. How are you doing? He said, well, I hear you're doing good. He said, Matt, I think you've paid your penance. He said, I've been hearing a lot of good things about you. And he said, I think when you get these felonies off your record. And I said, well, we agree with that. We agree. So he actually got me off probation earlier than was planned. But there were some cases that come through, and he got busy and he got distracted, and we didn't get my felonies expunged at that time. I don't even know how I got there. So anyway, I ended up breaking my arm, went to work for my dad. After about 12 weeks of healing up, Dad was like, you want to be my partner? So I'm 30-ish, 29, 30. He's 53, 54 at that time. And so my stance on it, I said, Dad, I have time to recover if we fail. So I'm all in. You're the one that's got the most to lose. And so we went all in on it. And so for the next 8 years, my official title, I think, was COO of Hillbilly Steels, which there's going to be some listeners here that know who that is. That company's still in operation, not by us. But it became, we literally have our equipment that we built on every continent in the world except Antarctica, and we just couldn't figure it out. But people found us from all over the world, and if you are determined, you can get that stuff into countries that say it can't come in. You just got to be creative with labeling. So anyway, we got them. It was big. I mean, we sold a lot of stuff. We ended up selling some commercial stuff, but we made some very unwise business decisions very early on when things were going well, and then just some other small mistakes throughout, and those things started rearing their head. 4 or 5 years down the road. It got to a point where it was unrecoverable. We tried some things. We actually started another company that didn't work. And so long story short, it ended up going bankrupt. And I'll never forget the day. I hadn't been comfortable with the industry I was in. I'm from Kentucky, and a lot of that industry will claim Christianity, but the fruits aren't there. And I just wasn't comfortable. And but I was the only one that felt that way. Looking back, that was conviction, but I didn't know how to process that. So it was almost like another salvation experience that I just gave up, and it gets a little personal for me because it's something. So I remember the day I hit my knees in my bathroom floor, And I just told God, I said, look, for the last 7 or 8 years, I've been trying to take my will and make it your will. And I've been trying to put a square in a circle. And so I surrender again. So I'd already given him my soul. I was already saved. I was already washed in the blood. But, man, I'd been fighting him. And he's going to win. Ask Jacob. He's going to win, you know. And so I told him, I said, well, Lord, today I give up. And I'm going to follow you. In your will. Because that's the only way I'm going to get joy back in my life. Because there was none. Other than my wife and my kids, there was no joy in my life. So, man, it was truly almost like another salvation experience. And I explained to people, when I stood up, it was just a feeling of relief that I didn't have to carry that burden anymore. Because he's like, well, finally, you idiot, I'll take that. And I set my company on I sent out a group text that day to all my partners, which was all my family. And I said, you guys asked me to run this ship, so we're setting a course for bankruptcy, and I have a plan that I had mapped out of how we were going to accomplish that and make sure we fulfilled all the obligations that we absolutely could. In bankruptcy, you can't fulfill them all, but I had a plan to fulfill a bunch of them, and because of the Lord, it worked out. And then I was on Indeed and was sending out my resume, and this guy called me. And he said, he owned a roofing company, and he said, is this Matt Haney? I said, yeah. He said, well, I'm sitting here looking at your resume here, and we'd like to talk to you. And I said, well, I didn't send you my resume. And you laughed. You said, well, I got it somehow. And so we carried on that conversation. I still say to this day, I didn't send you my resume. You were obviously the guy that called me. And I still to this day say I didn't send you my resume. But you got it. That's all that matters. And it just was right. And so went to work at Integrity as a project consultant and knew nothing about what I was doing. And you told me, so I'll teach you all that. I didn't know who you are. And so we went through a lengthy interview process, and I'm now running an office for the company and get to do a lot of cool stuff. And I was thinking on the way here this morning, it's just funny how the Lord works. I told you I had this just feeling of relief when I said, God, this is not your will. I've been fighting it. I know it. Let your will be done in my life. Let me get out of the way. I'm going to let you drive because I'm terrible at it. And then he just kind of takes over and he puts you places. And I'm in a meeting yesterday and we're talking about nothing to do with the Lord. Nothing. We're talking about a promotion we're wanting to do. And one of the guys looks at me and says, have you been praying about that? Have you been praying this way? And I grinned and I said, well, no, because I haven't been praying about it at all. And I just thought that was cool. I went from an industry where there was never prayer, really, not publicly, to now I'm working for a company where we could be in a company meeting and prayer break out, or just discussing the word and counseling each other in life and in scripture, and it's amazing. And then I get to do cool stuff like help it man up. I get to give back, and I get to do it all in the name of the Lord, and he gets all the glory, and it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I think one of the things you said a lot, obviously. I think one of the things that you said that probably most people listening could relate to is there's such a big difference between knowing Jesus from the standpoint of salvation and making him the Lord of your life.
Amen.
So your second experience was when you made him the Lord of your life. I remember having a couple of guys on here a few weeks ago, and one of the guys specifically referenced having to learn not to headstrong do all the things that he wanted to do and then ask the Lord to bless it.
Yeah.
And trying to move backwards and like, okay, what do you want me to do? Because I already know that path is blessed. And I think guilty as charged, especially I think depending on your personality, it's very easy to get caught in that rut. Well, my intentions are right, my heart is good, da-da-da-da-da, and we don't allow him to be the Lord in that area. We don't really even allow him to be the coach. We just kind of want him to bless our mess. And sometimes we wonder, well, why is there a mess, and why are you not getting me out of that? Well, he didn't lead us into it to begin with. Sometimes I think we have to wallow in it a little bit to realize I really don't want to go back there. I think that's pretty profound, though, that not only did you realize it, but you understand that was a turning point in your life.
When you think about David, man after the Lord's own heart, and he is. I was just telling the guy changing my brakes this morning, like, I can relate to that dude. Because he always got himself in a mess and then backed up and went, I'm reading Psalms right now, and he's like, Lord, get me out of this. And the Lord always did, but the Lord's like, I didn't put you here.
Yeah.
You worked your own way into that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah, you said it perfect. Like, I'd never actually thought about it that way, but you're right. I had a salvation experience, but I didn't necessarily make him Lord. I was forgiven and I was freed, but I still wanted to drive my own boat, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And that would have been 7 or 8 years after my salvation. That's how long it took for me to get tired enough to go, oh, I see.
Yeah. I think so many of us come to the place where we know that we need to give our life and make a change, and that becomes our salvation experience. But the whole discipleship thing, like, what do I do now? Okay, I know I'm not going to hell now. That's great. I got that taken care of. I feel better. But then we sometimes just live the majority of our life compartmentalized with, I know you're interested in what's going on Sunday, and I've got my radar tuned in. But the Monday through Saturday thing, it's still like we got our hands on the wheel trying to figure this thing out on our own, which is so bizarre. It's stupid, really, if you think about it. I've been reading a book just recently over the last week, and the author kept referring to, and I really have bought into this, but he was talking about basically after you become a believer and a disciple of Jesus, I really like to refer to it as an apprentice. And if you think about that, just if you understand how an apprentice works, and you look back as Jesus called the original disciples, I mean, they were apprenticing underneath him. He was teaching them how to interact with people. He was teaching them how to communicate with a crowd. He was teaching them how to keep their anger under control. He was teaching them how to go through hard times. He was teaching them how to pray. He was teaching them how to get away and have some solitude and, and really hear what the Father had to say and not just do your own thing, to live a very intentional life. And that's really what we're called to do. I mean, we're apprenticing. And how foolish would it be to try to be an apprentice but never pay attention to the journeyman? I mean, It's just it's pretty bizarre, really. So what do you think is the most misunderstood about Matt Haney? I know that's a question out of left field.
Yeah.
What do people misunderstand about you most, you think?
My wife was explaining to me the other day how to the point I can be. And she's like, you come across kind of like a butthole. She said, but I've been married to you long enough. Like, you're just to the point, and you go straight to the point. Check this off the box. Here's the point. And she said, where I sugarcoat things. So I think sometimes I come across brash and harsh, but I don't mean to. I'm really a extremely soft-hearted guy. I mean, talking about weird places to be in a company. I work for a company where it's not uncommon to be in a meeting and there's 10 guys in there crying. But I'm probably the one that tears up and gives alligator tears the most about any time I try to talk about anything that's important to me. And it don't matter what it is. But at the same time, as soft-hearted as I am, I come across pretty hardcore sometimes. And it is part of my personality, and in some things I am hardcore, but I think I'm not quite the butthole I can come off to be sometimes.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's a positive. I'm buying in. So you referenced your wife. How long you been married?
12 years this May.
How many kids?
I lost count.
Like the old man in the shoe.
Well, we're a blended family. She had 2 when we got married, but I've got 4 kids. So those kids have been mine since we got married, and so we've got 3 daughters and and one son, and I'm glad he came last.
There's a story there for another day, I'm sure. When you think about marriage now at this stage, 12 years later, what's one thing you could have done to be better prepared?
Man, so that's an extremely good question. I give my wife, we have a phenomenal marriage. Like to the point sometimes where I'll talk to her and I'm like, where do we need to work? Like what are we missing? Like I don't want to be somebody that says, well, I've got a great marriage at year 12, but then at year 20 there's a divorce on the line, you know. So because I missed something, so I'm constantly checking because we have this really phenomenal marriage. So I would say going into it we were pretty well prepared, but I give my wife all the credit for that. And there's a couple of reasons. She's an amazing person. She's an amazing Christian. And mentor and counselor in that. But she also went through a really bad marriage. And there's takes two to tango. You know, it wasn't just one-sided, and she'll admit that. So I think that worked well for me because where I probably wasn't as prepared as she was prepared to put up with me. And she showed me a lot of grace throughout all the years to where, and now she doesn't have to say anything. Like I can look at her and go, I probably shouldn't have said that. I probably shouldn't have done that. I need to go fix that. And the Lord has really laid it on me to be honest enough with myself to do that. But what I would say is, I do think we didn't get any counseling. So I do think some Christian counseling and truly some financial counseling on the front end of that marriage would have us in a better spot today. You know, from the marriage itself to raising our kids to obviously our financial position. I think we could have been better prepared there. So I think some sort of counseling on the front end before we got married. But that was so foreign to me at that time. I wouldn't have thought anything about it.
Yeah. Well, obviously, we're having this podcast today from Legacy Farm, and part of the mission and the whole reason that Legacy Farm exists was, you know, the mission statement was creating memories, but then it was empowering families. That was the second part of that. And that's core to what you just talked about. You know, eventually we're going to be offering premarital counseling retreats here, you know, and then marriage enhancements. We have one coming up actually in October. And because it's just so needed. You know, if people have a good marriage, they can have a great marriage. People have a bad marriage, you know, they can have it healed. And so it's not one of those things you set it and forget it. It's something you have to constantly be investing in. I think it's interesting. I was on a ride the other day with my daughter, and she asked me one of these deep questions, and she said, so Dad, you know, what's one thing you regret at this point in your life? So I had to think about it for a minute, but I already knew what the answer was. I didn't have to think about it very long. I said, you know what, I'll give you the caveat. She said, I can't imagine what it would be because you've not been risk averse. If you've seen something, you just kind of went for it. And I said, I think the biggest regret that I have is that I was consumed with trying to provide for a family and climb a corporate ladder, so to speak, career-wise, that I wish I would have spent more time preparing in the middle of that to be a better husband and to be a better dad. I said, you know, because I can look at my kids, especially like having this conversation with her. I mean, she reads so much on parenting. You know, she reads so much on marriage. In other words, she's a student of how do I become the best parent that I can be? How can I become, you know, the best wife that I can be? And I just remember that season of my life so busy helping other people and then trying to shoulder responsibility and provide for a family that I wish I would have spent more time. And it caught her off guard. She said, I would have never guessed that. But it was so true. And so I think as men, you know, again, our seasons are always changing. And some of them require more out of us than others. But I think the story that I'm trying to get to is we need to invest in the things that are important. And having an excuse of, well, you know, I come from a broken family. My dad was never around. My mom was this, I never had that when I was growing up. That should be motivation, not an excuse to be a better version of what we didn't have, and not an excuse to pass that on to another generation. You don't agree with that?
I couldn't agree with that more. So I don't know if you remember or not, but one of the very first conversations you and I had was we were at lunch. I was actually in training, and we were at lunch. And I told you then, and I still stand on it today, one of the greatest lessons I learned through rehab was what I can't control is what other people do. I can't control other people's actions. I can't control what somebody else does to me. There are things in life that happen that's not caused by anybody else that I cannot control. But what I can control is my response to those things, and how I handle that and how I deal with that. And it applies exactly to what you're saying. And I began, during that time, I began to reflect on people I'd known through my life. And I seen people go through the types of things that you're discussing, and I saw people handle that two different ways. Some used it and were extremely successful. Some ended up trapped in addiction and are still there today. And I think, and then once you get into that, you may not have been going with addiction, but it's obviously a part of my life, so that's where I tend to go. But we're going to cope with that one way or the other. So are you going to use it for motivation, or are you going to numb yourself? Or are you just going to pretend like it didn't happen and not deal with it? So I couldn't agree more. Like you've got to respond to things that happen in your life in a responsible manner.
I think it's so true in marriage, because we come from this place of origin. We come together, and we're, to stick on the marriage theme, we bring where we originated from. And so I remember sitting one time in a counseling type session with a young couple, and just so matter-of-factly, the female was talking about how she was throwing knives and just different things, and the husband was sitting there, and I had to have a look of shock on my face as I was listening, trying to process through that. And so I let them kind of go on for a minute. And when I asked, so how did your parents handle disagreement and tension? Well, it was the exact same way. So, my mom threw stuff, and, my dad would dodge things. And the point is she was coming from that, and it was normal. The guy was terrified coming from this, Christian home, where that is not how disagreements were handled. And both of them thinking, well, this is normal. And so we bring those two worlds just begin to clash. And there's so much at stake. We're so ill prepared to move into it because we're caught up in the infatuation, the emotion, or maybe even the lust. And then you say, I do, and it's like, wow, this is work, I just don't know if you make me happy anymore. I was having this conversation just not too long ago, and I was telling myself, one of the things that you and your spouse both have to settle is that divorce is not an option in this situation that we were talking about. And they'd brought it up, and I said, marriage is hard enough that you can't afford to have a distraction of focus if you want something to be able to work. If that's always in the back of your head, that's an option, then you're never pointed straight forward with a focus on how do I find the solution, because you're always wondering there may not be a solution. It's in the back of your mind, this may not work. And so we need to rewind. I don't think we want to hear this because it's not how our society is geared. But when you make a commitment to another person, you're making a commitment to serve that person for the rest of your life. And I think if we really had a better understanding of the word covenant, we understand contract in America. Covenant is deeper than a contract. And so when you stand before God and you make a covenant to another person, it's more than entering into a contract. And in that situation, irregardless of what your vows were, better or worse, whichever ones you used, to understand I made a commitment to serve my wife for the rest of her life. It doesn't matter if, she just doesn't make me happy anymore. It's not her responsibility to make me happy. It has very little to do with the covenant that I made. And when you go back and really begin to understand how high that bar is set, when Jesus talked to us as men, this is a Man Up podcast, he said, you're to love your wife the way I love the church and lay your life down for her. Now you think about that comparison. He laid his life down to the point of a cross. He endured stuff he didn't have to. He had options. He endured stuff that weren't his fault. He paid for things that he didn't buy or purchase. And so you take that mentality into a marriage, it's like there really is an excuse for me not to be fully focused, you know? And I think if we would just understand and step back for a minute and realize, wow, there is so much riding on me making this work. I mean, I've got an audience many times of little kids that are watching, and they're trying to figure out, is that normal? Is that how I'm supposed to do this thing when I grow up? Is that what's acceptable? And we're modeling that. I just think sometimes if we would just tweak a couple of things in our mind, like, hey, I entered into a covenant. Hey, this is a lifelong commitment. Hey, this is not all about me. It's about me serving another person. Because I bring all that up because of what you said a while ago. We can't control what happens to us, but we can control what happens in us. And just like I can't control changing my wife, nor can she control changing me, but I am in complete control and responsible for how I treat her. It's up to the Holy Spirit to deal with things he needs to change in her, just like things he needs to change in me. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I don't even know what to add because I couldn't agree more. And but that hits really close to home, as you well know. And I tried counseling somebody and said, look, that was, I don't care what's going on today. Years ago, before God, you said that was your person. You said, better or worse, rich or poor. In love with them or not, it don't matter. Like, figure it out, man, because you made a commitment. And that commitment was to that other person, but it was also to the Lord and before the Lord. I don't care if it's 10 years or 40 years later, the commitment doesn't change.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it is exactly. So like, and I'm trying, I think often, it's funny you say that because I think often, like I watch my girls and like I got one that's 19, and my two youngest ones, 13 and 11. I just think about how am I going to counsel them before they get married? Because I'm going to, and their future husband is going to listen to me, whether he wants to or not. I'll corner him, I'll tie him down, I'll do whatever I have to. They're going to listen to me, but what am I going to tell them? And what you just laid out there is what I'll always come back to. Like, that's the most important thing. Like, make sure, because this is the biggest commitment you're going to make in your entire life. I dare say, I can't sit here and say another commitment that I can think of off the top of my head that is as strong as that one. That is, divorce is not an option. This is for life. So, do you love her that much? Do you? And do you love him that much? And what does that really look like? And then trying to demonstrate that to them. And I hope Ashley and I are demonstrating that to them. Because I did grow up in a house where there was a lot of fighting. There was throwing of things. I don't remember knives, but I do remember whiskey glasses. So, I lived that. And that is one thing that I do not want my kids to ever go through. And they're not. And they won't. Now, do we have disagreements? Yeah. I can honestly say I'm in a marriage that, and she and I were talking about that, I can count on one hand how many we've had. And I think two of those our kids have witnessed that were, fights where there was anger involved and emotions that we shouldn't have. And we have learned from them and we step back from them now. But I don't want my kids witnessing that. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm going to ramble. I couldn't agree more with what you just said.
Tense moments of fellowship.
Yeah.
Yeah, the good thing about it is,
Tense moments of fellowship, yes.
A caveat, I think, to all that is, if you're out there and, but man, if you're in the middle of the battle and you're fighting through how you feel and your emotions, come back to what's at stake. That's really what we're saying. There's no guilt or condemnation in what we're saying, but if you're in a fight, you need to realize your marriage is a fight. And not that you're going to fight all the time, but there's something worth fighting for. And the ripple effect through the generations on how well we do that is worth us taking that serious. And that's kind of my whole point, in bringing all that up. So,
Yeah, I mean, there's no shame in a divorce. I mean, if you've got a divorce in your past, there's no shame. My wife has a divorce in her past. And to be honest with you, the preacher we were under at the time when we were dating and we'd been in his church, he wouldn't marry us because she was divorced. That was his conviction. That's okay. That's his interpretation. But I'm good with that. But because of the grace that is bestowed upon us and, and her story, and she would have to tell it, but her salvation came after her divorce, and all that's washed away. But it doesn't matter if it comes before or after; it's still washed away, right? But if you're in a marriage, if you're currently in a marriage and you're fighting for it, what you said a while ago was spot on. The first thing you have to get through our thick skulls is there is no exit strategy. Yeah. There is no divorce. That covenant was made. That promise was made. You both got to get that. Once you get that through your head, you can work through anything.
Yeah, and that's it. You've got to be fully focused on the solution. There's too many distractions if you're looking at options. So anyway, I was reading something actually just this morning. I thought it was so good. And this guy, he's talking about the last season of your life. I think this book is called The Final Lap. Couldn't even tell you who the author was, but it caught my attention. I began to read it. And he was going back through the history of his family, through his grandparents and how different they were, and then his parents, and how some of that he fought now, even today, being a grandparent himself, because he referenced going to a lumber yard. If you ever went to a big box store and you're doing your own deck project or a project at home, you sit there and you sort through all the boards and cull out the ones that are warped and split, and all those things, and you're hand selecting the ones you want. He talked about how he's had to do that his entire life now in his, I guess, late 70s, early 80s, culling out the things that were passed on to him that he didn't want to pass on to his family and the next generation, keeping the things that were good, culling out those things that weren't. I thought, what an illustration. But then he made this point when he was describing his wife. He talked about how she had such a great relationship with her dad and how her dad had loved her so well and how he was so thankful for that because he got a woman that had been well loved, that didn't have as many hurts sometimes as a lot of our wives have because of the journey they've taken or where they've came from and the hole that was left there that somebody didn't fill. And I think it just goes back to the point of why we need to fight so hard. Not for perfection, because we're human. We're going to mess up. I think our kids can learn as much sometimes from our mess ups as us striving to be perfect. How we say we're sorry, how we own responsibility, how we say this is why we don't do that, and here's the repercussions of that, and all those different things. But to give some kind of healthy model and example of how marriage actually can work, and the fruit of that in kids. It's a lot easier to build boys and girls than it is to repair men and women. And we know that, and that's what we're working on every day. Well, I don't know how we ended up on this marriage theme.
It's not where we were supposed to go.
No, but hey, it was.
It was divine.
It was. So listen, I also know you're involved in the Grub Fest. You were involved in the Grub at Man Up last year. You coordinated all that. We smoked a big hog. Some of you guys probably seen pictures on our website of that. That was just a really, really cool experience. And we have Grub Fest now, April 18th. We're just, at the time of this airing, we're just going to be less than a week away. You can go online and get more information about that. Celebration Center, 6 to 7:30, depending on when you're listening to this podcast. But you're heading up the cooking team for that. So talk to us a little bit about your passion for cooking, as well as the what's our menu for that night? What's that going to look like at the Grub Fest?
I think it's going to be good. So there's about 4 or 5 of us that's going to be cooking, and I'm. Well, real quick, you said my passion. I enjoy cooking. I don't know if I'm good at it or not. People tell me I am. I enjoy doing it.
You are.
It's my stress relief. I mean, for years, a lot of times the kids look forward to Sunday because they know Dad's going to cook, and I will spend all day, and I will do things the hard way so instead of buying minced garlic, I'm going to peel it and mince it and all that myself. does it make it any better? I don't know, but there's a little more love that goes into that dish, you know. So I enjoy it. So I usually, anytime there's an opportunity to cook, I'm putting myself out there. So we're gonna have two things. We're gonna have one of the guys is doing chili. He's got a really good chili recipe, and I'm actually a little envious because he showed me he needed a different pot. So I had a pot we could use, but he and I talked, and it was kind of too big. And yesterday in a meeting, he came over and he said, "What about this pot?" I was like, "Well, if you don't buy that, I probably am. And it'd be better for me if you'd spend your money because I really like that pot." So he's going to have the coolest pot there. But anyway, he's doing chili, and we're going to do some jambalaya too. So, we'll probably go ahead and put the shrimp in the jambalaya because we will have chili there. I don't know if that makes any sense. That's a thought that I've been running through my mind. Do we want shellfish in there or not? But we're going to have the chili for an option if somebody's allergic. So, I think it's going to be phenomenal. And I know that's hard for some people to get to. You know, people will be listening to this all over the U.S., and I hate it. Some of them are going to miss out. Because I think it's going to be a great night of some good food and fellowship, and then kind of casting the vision of what this year's Man Up is going to look like. You know, there's obviously, as you well know, there's more to it than a campfire in a tent. You know, there's a lot that goes into it, and there's a purpose behind everybody being there.
Yeah, super excited about that. We're expecting exponential growth on that. We'll be rolling out the new website and some new things we'll be announcing actually that night. So if you're listening to this and you haven't bought your ticket yet, I encourage you to go online, manup.com, or Man Up Adventure Camp. Find us on our Facebook. I think there's a link here even in the podcast. Not an experience that you're going to want to miss. What are your expectations coming into camp this year?
I just expect the Lord to move and the Holy Spirit to be present. And when that's happening, I just try to sit back and be along for the ride and see what happens. You know, the only thing I expect is for me to give everything I got to the Lord and see what He does with it. So whatever He plans for my involvement in this year, I'll be going into it head first, whichever, full commit. Every time, it's so hard to explain to people what it's like, you know. And I think part of that is because the world we live in, like, you get anxiety if you think about setting your phone aside for 24 hours, for 12 hours. Let's be real, for 10 minutes, much less 48 hours. You know, you get anxiety about it, like, oh my gosh, what if something happens? Well, this earth rotated for the majority of the time since creation without cell phones. So we will, and the human race did just fine. So we will survive. And just getting rid of that junk and that distraction. Like, it's the biggest distraction you get rid of. And then just being able to talk to other guys is, man, we just usually have our heads down, elbows up, we're working, and we don't even talk about things that are bothering us. And for that matter, as soon as we don't even celebrate wins. So just to have a chance to slow down and fellowship with men and do that in a setting where the Holy Spirit is present, it's incredible. And you can't even describe it. And you leave and people are like, what was it like? And you're like, man, it was awesome. Well, what do you mean? It was awesome. Like, you got to go. You had to experience it. You know, it's like, I don't know how to tell you. You know, I'm a big NASCAR fan, and people are like, oh, they're going in circles. I'm like, yeah, but you've never been at one when they drop the green flag and they come, like, that's an experience you can't explain. So it's different, but it's the same way here. Like, I wish I could explain that experience to you. I wish I could give you a taste of what it's like, but I don't know how. You just got to be there, and you got to be there to experience it, and you will leave different than you came.
For some of you that haven't experienced the camp, you know, one of the things that happens is every camp is broke down into no more than 10 guys. So each one has what we call an adventure captain. And that's really kind of where the moment or the magic really happens. It's around that campfire in a small group where you're going to make brothers for life, whether you knew them before you came into camp or you met them for the first time. We've heard both stories. But one of the things that we're going to do that's going to be different this year is on Saturday night, everybody cooks around their own campfire. And so we're actually going to judge the best campfire cuisine, where guys will be able to medal for this. And so, you know, we've got guys that, you know, they're, a wiener and a can of chili guys. And then, you know, I've seen T-bone steaks, baked potatoes buried in the ground, the whole bit in a campsite next to us last year, and probably everything in between. I know you're going to be one of the judges at that. Why don't you give these guys maybe some campfire hacks if maybe they haven't cooked around a campfire? Because you don't have to be, let's be real. You don't have to be an experienced camper. You don't have to be Bear Grylls. You don't even have to know how to cook. I mean, I could burn water, okay? And so we fumble through this. That's the beauty of having 10 other guys, in your group. And but what would you say to those guys? Any campfire hacks, any cheat codes you could give us? Anything for maybe the guys that don't want to survive off of just tube steak and potato chips?
I don't overthink it. It's a campfire, so you're only going to have so much to work with, and that's okay. Some guys are going to do really well by having their wives cook something and bring it and warm it up. And some guys are going to put a lot into it, and then they may be disappointed when that perfectly roasted hot dog wins the competition. Because hey, what's better? What's better on a campfire than a brat or a hot dog? Maybe a s'more. I have one thing my family and I do is we don't take a lot of vacations, but our vacations are usually with tents and a campfire, and so I've cooked everything from homemade chili in a camp to beef stew, and everything tastes different on a campfire. Everything is better on a campfire. My favorite thing about camping is coffee, because I think it's just better on a campfire. But with that being said, when I do that, my truck is sitting right beside me, and so I can pack all this stuff out there. So think through it and plan, because you're going to have to carry it. You're going to have to carry it with 3/4 of a mile to a mile, somewhere around there. So if you want to bring that big Dutch oven, that's great. Somebody's going to have to volunteer to carry that sucker. And if you bring steaks and baked potatoes, that's fine. Somebody's got to carry that, and that steak's got to be kept cold for 24 hours, So, think through those things.
Yeah.
Outside of that, you can take a Dutch oven and make cobbler with about 3 ingredients: flour, peaches, and butter, a little sugar, So you can do some really simple things, or you can get complicated. Just as you're planning with your group, just keep in mind, everybody's going to have a role, because you got to carry that stuff in.
Yeah.
And at that point, you're excited about what's to come. So on Sunday, after our last service, now you got to carry that stuff out. Probably haven't had good sleep. You're tired. You haven't had a bath in 2 days, and you don't really want to carry that stuff out. So keep that in mind too, because what you carry in, you've got to pack out. So
yeah,
I would keep all those things in mind.
That's where a great camp captain comes in, because those guys are going to get together over a phone call. Hey, can you bring the cooler? Or can you bring the bacon?
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of evenly distribute that load. You don't have one guy being the pack horse having to carry everything in. I know on our campsite, I had a gentleman in our camp that was from St. Louis, and they had made biscuits and homemade gravy, and they just had it in Ziploc bags and had it in a cooler. And so we were able to throw those, in the pan on the fire, warm those biscuits up, warm the biscuits and gravy. There wasn't a lot of prep. My wife had made like homemade chicken and noodles and chili. Again, all I had to do is dump it out of a bag into a pot. It took a matter of minutes. You still kind of had the comforts of home. So you kind of got everything in between. So the point is, it's a shared experience. So
I'll tell you one that I thought about when you said that, which, by the way, my stomach's fixing to growl now that we're talking about this. Shane's back there going, yeah. One cheap thing you can do is you can get a steamer like you would use on a flat top grill. So I have a grill called a Kudu. And if you don't know what that is and you're an outdoorsman, you need to look it up, because it's a phenomenal grill. Not one you're going to use at home, but if you like to camp and get outdoors, they're heavy to pack, but they're awesome. That's what it's made for. Anyway, it's got a steamer. It's about this big. And so what you can do is you can put your biscuits in a pan, if you don't want to do what you did, because what you did is probably a better idea. But if you want to take a can of biscuits out there and you want them fresh and all that, take an aluminum pan, just a disposable, get it at a dollar store. Put your biscuits in that, and when you put them on your fire, you get it up off your fire, and you put that steamer over it, and you've created an oven. You can make some really good biscuits. It's cheap, it's easy, and you don't have to pack a lot of stuff in.
I bet that'd work for cinnamon rolls too, wouldn't it?
It would absolutely work for cinnamon rolls, and yeah, absolutely.
I'm feeling that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So what did you like most about your experience at camp?
Oh, man, I think for me it's the worship. Like, I did enjoy I enjoyed the campfire. I enjoyed sitting around in the camaraderie with my guys, the laughing, the crying, the deep moments where guys are really making themselves vulnerable. But overall, I think the worship, which it's honestly my favorite part on Sunday morning too. Like I really enjoy the music and the worship. So for me, I get a lot out of that. And then that's followed, on Saturday, it's followed by solitude. And I don't get much of that. So that's an important hour and a half there for me, just to get away. And I don't have my phone and nobody's asking a question. And this morning, for instance, on the way up here, there was a podcast I really wanted to listen to. And because of my phone, it's an hour-long podcast. I had a 45-minute drive, and I think I got through 10 minutes of the podcast. So for me, just to be able to set that aside, and my phone's not there blowing up, and I love them to death, but my kids aren't yanking, pulling me. I just get some solitude time that was preceded by worship, and that's amazing.
What's the one thing about camp that you didn't expect?
I didn't. That's a really good question. I think the one thing about camp I didn't expect was how it would affect me in a way that I almost can't explain. So just being able to get some things off my chest, being able to fellowship with guys and realize that, I'm not the only one struggling with things. And maybe even through that and hearing other guys talk and just having a conversation, realizing that I'm struggling with some things that I didn't realize I was struggling with because I've never paid attention to them. I just put them back there and pulling that stuff out and kind of dealing with it, and then leaving a different person than I came, because I actually left some baggage out there in that field, and gave it to the Lord. Like I didn't necessarily expect that. I didn't really know what to expect, but I didn't expect that. And I expected to not want to do it again, and I can't wait to do it again.
Yeah, it's interesting. Many of the guys had never camped or had a tent before, and I hear the stories about, we bought a tent for the first time. I didn't even know how to set it up, but they didn't have to be a camper. They were coming for the experience, and the experience wasn't as much about camping, I think, as they realized when they left. It was about the experience they really had with the Creator and how they were challenged, how they were reminded they had a purpose, that failure wasn't final, that, man, there's something for me to do. I was created for a reason. There's a legacy that I can leave. It's not too late. Yesterday ended last night. You can throw all these different things in there, but it's like, it was so much more than about camping. And for some of you, there's like, maybe your excuse was, I don't have a tent, I don't have a sleeping bag. One of the things we've done this year is you can actually rent a tent. You can actually rent a sleeping bag from us. You can, or even a sleeping pad if you don't want to sleep on the ground. We've tried to make this we'll set it up for you before you get here. So we've tried to process through, like, what are the excuses to get guys over the hump? Because it's hard, like you said a while ago, to put in words what the experience is like. It's not like, well, man, I could go out in my backyard and camp. Yeah, you could, but it's different with 300 other guys in a band, and 30 campfires, and guys sharing their story from all different walks of life, from blue collar to white collar, and we're all on the same page. It's different. You can't describe it.
Well, as men, our natural tendency, and I don't care if you've never been in a tent and you've never left the city, you are still a hunter and a gatherer. That's what we do, and that's what you do. And I think I didn't know that about the tents and stuff. I think that's phenomenal, because remove all of those excuses, because once you get those guys there that have all of the, well, I've never camped, well, I don't have a tent, well, I can't sleep on it. Whatever the excuse is, the more of those we can remove and get those men here, they will be back. Because my point in the hunting and gathering is you get out there, you get in the woods, you get in the field, and you're kind of in touch. You don't even realize that there's a part of us that's where we're supposed to be. And then we're inviting the Holy Spirit to come in and fellowship with us. And then you got all these other men there experiencing the same thing. And it is something that you can't imagine. And you will crave it to come back.
Yeah, I believe that. I'll try to land this really quickly, but there's two other things I want to get to the audience before we get out of here. What are you doing to simplify your life, or maybe sharpen your focus or your vision and the goals that you have for the future? In a busy world like now, we talk a lot about how do I slow down while speeding up. What's that balance kind of look like? What are you doing to simplify your life?
Honestly, a lot of it's time management, and I've noticed how quickly my kids are growing up, and I think I've always done pretty well about being efficient with my time with them. But I'm trying to manage my time better. So, one thing, and I've noticed, I was thinking this morning, it changes with seasons. There was a season in my life where I felt like if I left earlier for work, maybe even before they were up, then I could be home closer to the time they get home from school and spend more time with them. Well, that season changed to where now Ashley needs my help a little bit in the morning. So, but they're getting my time too. So I'm intentional with that time. I set my phone down. I'm helping them get ready for school and doing the things I need to do. And then any opportunity that I see that I have to give my family my time. And when I talk about investing in my family, I mean, there's a financial investment in that at times, but it's really about my time and giving them me. So I'm trying to be very intentional and more efficient with that. And that's challenging because if there was a time last fall where I had some things going on in my life, and I texted a really close friend of mine. I said, "Man, I need your prayer because it doesn't matter where I'm at right now. I feel like I'm not where I'm supposed to be. So if my mom was in the hospital at that time, and I was like, look, if I'm at the hospital with my mom, I feel like I should be at work or with my family. And if I'm at work, I feel like I should be with my family or my mom. And if I'm with my family, I feel like where I really ought to be is at work or with my mom." I said, I don't know where I'm supposed to be. I'm just praying and doing the best I can. So I really need some prayer. So my point in all that is I'm trying to be intentional and efficient with my time, but it's always a balancing act.
Yeah.
And life changes and seasons change, and almost daily you just got to filter through that and try to figure it out.
What's the word man up mean to you? If I said, what does it mean to man up?
Well, it's changed. It used to be how good of a fighter am I? How much can I lift? How much can I carry? All those manly things. How good can I shoot my gun? How, whatever, those types of things. And now,
the temporal things.
The what?
The temporal things.
Oh, the temporal things, absolutely. And now it is truly for me, and this sounds cliche, but it's about living for the Lord. And to me, the men that I see in my life that are the manliest, they're living for the Lord, and they are striving. That doesn't mean they don't mess up. It doesn't mean they don't do things that they shouldn't, but they are striving every day, and they live their life on those principles. So they are committed to a marriage, good, bad, or indifferent. And that does take two. I mean, it can't be lopsided commitment, but men specifically, for me, it's the ones that do that if their marriage is south, they dig in, they work on it. When their kids are having problems, their counsel is, this is how I handle this, and this is what the Lord says about it. And to me, that's what manning up is, and that's what being a man is being the leader of your family, but that means spiritually and biblically as well.
Grit and Grace. There's the title for a future show. How does Matt Haney want to be remembered when your life's over here on earth?
We answered that question yesterday. So for me, and obviously within my family, but I hope that the Lord allows it to expand out past that. I want to be remembered as a guy that wasn't afraid to share his failures so that other people didn't have to make those same failures. And I want to be remembered not only as a guy that does that, but does that in a Christ-like manner. And somebody can say, you know what? That dude was a train wreck. But every day, he worked to be a little more Christ-like than he was the day before.
Not where I need to be, but thank God I'm not where I used to be.
was. Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Wow. Matt, thanks for joining the show today. This has been a real treat. Every time I hear your story, I hear something new. Somehow I had missed the whole college bit, which that was kind of interesting in and of itself. But I just think there's so much hope that comes out of that, to see where you're at now, where you're at in your life, the influence you have, the people's lives that you're impacting. Man, you're a trophy of God's grace, and that's pretty cool. And if that's not your story and you're listening today, it could be. And I think we'll just end it right there. Remember, legacy is not what you leave to people. It's really what you leave in people. We'll see you next time on the Man Up Podcast. Hey, Terry Gwaltney here from the Man Up Podcast. Listen, I just want to tell you how much we appreciate you supporting the podcast, listening to it. We hope it's adding a ton of value to your life. Also want to ask you to do us a favor. If you could like and share this podcast on wherever you consume your social media content, whether that be YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, we would appreciate it. It just helps us get the word out so we can help more people. And maybe you've never experienced the Man Up Adventure Camp that we do in October. You can check out our Facebook or our website, manup-camp.com. Once again, I want to thank you for listening to the Man Up Podcast, and we'll see you soon.